Hello, everyone, and welcome to this scientific workshop from the GRC on education. My name is Aisen Etcheverry. I'm the National Director for the National Agency for Research and Development in Chile. I would like to start this seminar with a few slides on the Global Research Council, what we do and why this is important. So I'm going to share my screen. I hope you can all see the slides well. Like I said, the Global Research Council was established in 2020. It's a virtual organization that unites in one instance most of the funding agencies for science and innovation around the world. What we hope to achieve with the Global Research Council is to create a collective vision on research and innovation and play a leading role in providing solutions that the society needs. The Global Research Council acts as a forum of funding agencies. And what we do at the Global Research Council is to share best practices and discuss issues that are common to our different agencies. Also, around the Global Research Council, we facilitate and promote bilateral and multilateral collaboration between our agencies and also the different scientists that work around our different agencies. This collaboration has been of great help during the COVID-19 pandemic, and it's a way by which the different agencies share different views, generate consensus on different ways of participating, and that way we can collaborate to the internationalization of the research that it's done in our countries. We believe strongly on the equitable and diverse and inclusive future for the global diversity of talent. And also we want to maximize the trust that is placed in science by society, by governments, and by the community as a whole. The way the GRC is organized is with an annual meeting where all the different agencies from all around the globe get together. During those meetings, we have worked in a number of statements of principles and standards that are developed by way of consensus among the different agencies in order to harmonize the way we approach the funding of research. But also the Global Research Council organizes around working groups where we can dive deeper on the different issues that are relevant for our agencies and our countries. Finally, we also organize regionally. This scientific workshop was organized by the region of the Americas of the GRC as a way of recognizing the specific characteristics of our larger communities, in this case, the Americas. So the scientific workshop we are going to start today with these amazing scientists and their research is basically an idea that arose on December 2020 during the Americas Region COVID-19 virtual seminar. During that seminar, we thought it was a good idea to generate spaces for researchers to share their experiences around COVID-19. We organize an organizing committee that is composed by APESPE in Brazil, Conicet in Paraguay, Conicet in Argentina, and CIRC in Canada, and of course, ANID in Chile. And with this organizing committee, we defined 3 different topics, and we invited experts from the different countries to expose the research and their views on the pandemic, the COVID, and its consequences. The first workshop focused on health systems and was held in October 13. The second one in research and infrastructure, and that happened yesterday. And today we are going to focus on education. The objective of this workshop is to share basically the different impact, but also the way our researchers and scientists view the effects of COVID-19, and to do that in a larger framework, the framework that was proposed by the United Nations Research Roadmap for the COVID-19 recovery. I invite every one of you to look at that framework. It's an interesting work that was done with the participation of many countries, and what we achieved during the framework was to propose a collective view on how from knowledge and innovation and science we could contribute to the post-pandemic world as well. During today's workshop, we're going to have different representatives. I'm going to present each one of them. In the case of Uruguay, Professor Fernando González, he's from the Faculty of Information and Communication from Universidad de la República. Representative of Chile is Professor Roberto Araya from the Institute of Education of Universidad de Chile. In the case of Argentina, we'll have Professor Silvia Grinberg from the Sociology of Education and Pedagogy of the National University of San Martin. Representing Paraguay, Professor Alejandra Floyd from the Psychology Department of the Catholic University of Asunción. In the case of Brazil, we'll have Professor Lorena Barbiera from the Department of Political Science of the University of Sao Paulo. And last but not least, Professor Burke. She is part of the Literacy Education and Early Learning from the Faculty of Education of the Memorial University, representing Canada. Before starting the presentations, I would like to just say a few words on the importance of education and why we picked education as one of the topics for this scientific workshop. We have all lived under the COVID-19 pandemic for the last almost 2 years, and education was probably one of the sectors that was the most impacted. We saw and we lived, each one of us, especially those that have kids, the vulnerabilities of our educational systems. We had to shift to an online education. However, our educational system were not ready for it. It took several months for many of our countries to be able to connect our students and teachers. And in the case of Chile, for example, at the beginning, most schools were just sending through emails to the parents the materials for the students to work. And that added to the working from home that was necessary because of the pandemic, created also many difficulties, particularly for women that were excluded in many cases from the workforce as a consequence of the pandemic. But also these crises provide opportunities. And with education and the pandemic, we saw those opportunities emerge and be developed by our innovators and our scientists. We saw many tools that were created. Countries made a particular effort to connect their students. Many of us generated good advance in providing the digital tools for our students to be able to connect, equipment, connectivity, but also new ways of sharing knowledge and new ways of teaching were created during this period. These are some of the topics we're going to hear from our scientists and researchers during today's workshop. We hope this can provide an opportunity to learn more about the challenges we're going to face, also an opportunity to generate a stronger and better collaboration among the scientific communities of our American region. We hope you had an excellent seminar. We will have the presentations of each one of our experts. Charapilla, who's connected and she's part of ANIT, she will be helping me with the moderating of the panel. I have to, we are in the process of discussing our budget in Congress, so I will have to leave the seminar and will not be able to continue with the moderation, but Charapilla will be in charge of that. I apologize to all of you. This was something that came up in the agenda just recently. So with that, I leave Charapilla with you so she can start with the different presentation. Thank you so much, Charapilla, and thank you so much to all the participants of today's seminar.
Thank you, Aisen. Thank you for being with us and to bring up the topics and talk about GRC. So we move now to our presentations. As Aisen already mentioned, we have 6 presenters today. So we will be starting with Dr. Silvia Grinberg as a professor of sociology and of education and pedagogy. So Professor Silvia, the floor is yours.
Hi, give me a minute here. Okay, good morning, everybody. All. I feel honored to be here and to share some of our output research that we are running in Buenos Aires metropolitan area. We are a team that belong both to Conicet, that we work both in Conicet and National University of San Martin, UNSAM. We are many, so what I will share today is not just me. We are working with the idea of cartography, of everyday schooling, and I would like to think this cartography as a challenge of to educational policies and what have they got to say to educational policies. I will talk first in 2 moments of our fieldwork, 2 slides or 2 research output before COVID lockdown, and after that, some of our results after or post lockdown, and then I will try to present some conclusion in my 10 minutes. So I'm moving to my first slide, and what we have been showing, what this map shows are 2 things. I think one is that the expansion and growth of enrollment in all our educational system, but also some things to highlight. First of all, as you can see in the map, we have high rates on dropping out, on re-enrollment, on repetition, and over-age students. What I think they show some kind of exclusionary exclusion. I mean, our even at the same time the enrollment growth, at the same time the other rates, educational rates also grow. So we have what we like to say 2 kind of forces, one centrifugal forces that enclose poorest population, and other one that we call them like struggles to get in. I mean, students and families that struggle for knowledge and for education. And this we can see in our interview that in the words of our students. What I highlighted there is a student that said that he enjoyed to study, that he's interested, and this is why he moves around the schooling system looking for someone that will teach him. So, and below you can read a young girl that said us that she's worried because she said we keep getting dumber and dumber. So what we see in the map, what we saw in the map before, is also expressed here at 13 for school, and something that we have seen many years before, that is some kind of fluctuation of enrollment. I mean, teacher and students enroll themselves, but after a few months they quit going to the school, but after they go back. And why they do that? Because they are looking for schools that will teach them. Now, as I promised before, I'm sharing now some results and output from research. This is a poll that is still running out. We are still running this poll, but some of the results we thought it were interesting to share today. I highlighted some of them, and as you can see in the table, there are 3 highlighted with red because they have more than 80% of agreement from the student. What they said, that they feel that they learn less in virtual classes, but also at the same time that their teachers are concerned with them, with the tasks they have to solve. So what we see here is a very important role of teaching of the teachers. And other thing that I want to highlight here is that they like to share WhatsApp group, but they don't like to share social media with their teachers. Other one, this was made by last year, I mean in 2020. One is a comic made by the student. I like this too much because they talk about they are out of butts. But when I saw it, I thought they were talking about their bodies, themselves. But no, they say that what is out of butts are their cell phone and Wi-Fi that are so tired. On the other side is a professor diary storytelling that I think that dialogue very well with the comic. And what I want to point out is the idea of bonds. A teacher that talks that what they have had to create to drain a bit in education during last year is the creation of bonds. And this, they say that is critical because bonds generate trust. And last slide related to research output is something that is now in field work that we are doing right now in this year. And it's related to compensatory program that was designed to work on all the post-lockdown issues. So I want to share two situations. One of them is that new support teachers have entered to work in schools, but with no experience. So and with no experience, but also with no specific spaces in school to work on this compensatory program. So what the support teacher works in the hallways of the schools. Other thing that I want to highlight here is many of these compensatory programs and these new positions, it works in the school with previous lack of regular positions. So which is the case? You can have a support teacher on math, but you don't have the regular teacher on math. At the same time, maybe the director or the principal of the school is allowed to conduct all these new and old educational programs. So this is why I put on the right side of the slide what might go wrong. So another thing, even modular compensatory courses that are planned as face-to-face and virtual classes, but separately. So what is going on is that everybody do what they can. So, and now I'm trying to move to some conclusions. What have we learned? I think that the first thing that we learn is that technology alone will not resolve the problem. Distribution, of course, of electronic devices and access and connection is critical, but not enough. Google does not teach, and we need teachers, and we need to teach. And teaching is, of course, is a space where students link to each other and to knowledge. Another thing that I want to highlight is that sticking plaster policies not only do not resolve problems, but create new ones. Schools that are left to resolve problems on their own deepen the exclusionary inclusion and reinforce inequality. So I think that when we think about policies, we need to make this question: what does a school need to be a school in 21st century? So, and in doing so, policies need to be thought and be not as a claim to school, but in the name of schools. And now, one of the questions was how much international collaborative agenda, research agenda is important, and I think that it is. Yes, we need it. And we need it in a local level, global and local level, and how they talk to each other. related to what post-media society. I think that right now we are living in a post-media society. This is a watery concept that we need solid and dynamic infrastructure as well. What does it mean? That we need to think both between old and new soft, hard technologies, face-to-face technologies, and virtual teaching. And we need to think school as bonds to organize and re-innovate education as an assemblage. And also, and new other things, we need to think about new and known ways of inequalities, teaching and learning in post-media societies. And when we talk about teaching, and with this I finished my presentation, we need to think not just as access to information, but as school and teaching, as where with access to conceptualize and create space of thought and understanding of the world. I like to talk about wording the world. So many thanks, and this is me, Silvia Grinberg, and a team from UNSAM. Thank you so much. I think that I used my 8 minutes. Sharapira, is it?
You used 10 minutes actually. So, but anyway, thank you very much, Silvia. No problem. Now, please, for the audience, if you can post your questions in the Q&A box. So please do so, and of course mute your mic and etc. So we will have all presentations first, and then at the end we will have a kind of responding panelists to all questions received, or maybe you can ask questions between yourselves. We can ask questions as well. We have some questions for you as well. So with this, I will invite Roberto Araya to present. He's from the Institute of Education, Universidad de Chile. Roberto, thank you.
Okay, so I'm going to share screen. Okay, can you see it?
Yes.
Yeah, so I'm going to show a research we've been doing with the APEC. APEC is the Asian Pacific Economies. There are 21 countries, and we've been working together for more than 10 years. And in each big problem, we see an opportunity. So can computer modeling lesson help tackle the pandemic? I'm going to show an elementary and middle school experience. Oh, okay, this doesn't, okay. So I'm going to 4 parts. First, COVID, challenges in school, then computational modeling, and experience with 4th and 8th graders, and conclusions. Okay. So first part. So we have been working APEC, a computational thinking curriculum that has basically algorithmic thinking, computational models, and machine learning. We've been working with this for several years, and we're trying to implement it in all different countries. We use the methodology of lesson study, means several teachers work together in a community trying to improve just a lesson. This work for several weeks, months, even years. And we are doing this together, all these countries. We see here a big opportunity, so we're optimistic. We know this is very painful, but we see that first, understanding the key aspect of pandemics has effect on virus transmission. So that's very important. Second, we see an opportunity for motivation. So it's a real problem. All the kids have their families. So how can we understand this problem? How can we make any difference? So it's a big motivation tool. So I'm going to show you the computational model the kids have been working. So we see people as small balls. And what is contaminated, let's say the orange one, and somehow as the time goes by, this start to touching other people, other balls, and the computation will spread. So it's a very simple model with balls. Here you see they work it's a pool table. So we have at the right more density. Here, not too many people, so density is important. The more people you have, more probability of contamination. Second, here some small balls, some big balls. Why big balls? What does this mean? some of them are with masks, some of them without masks. So to ask you, everybody can then tell me why different sizes and which one would be people without masks. The third is velocity. So in people move, this mobility. So the more people and the more they move, maybe there's more possibility of contamination. This mobility is very important. So they have to think about this. This is the computational model, and here is our experience with 4th to 8th graders. We have just the last couple of months of working on this. I'm going to show the experience in Chile. 90 students from 2 schools, 48 girls, 2 boys, all from 4th grade to 8th grade. So we did a pretest, a lesson. This is just 10, 15 minutes lesson, and post-test. See if they understood the computational model and somehow they can see the limitations and how this apply to their real life. Supertest has something like this. What is COVID? What do you know someone who was infected? What factors do infections depends on? What causes infections to increase? And some examples. And here comes the most important question. Create a COVID game. What would be the table or board look like? Like, in the table or the board game. What would be the balls or chips look like? The people. What would be the infections be like? What does the number of infected tokens or balls depend on? How would you represent the people with masks? So that's some ideas they have to think and develop. Here are the schools. These are some of the schools. You see this just a couple of months ago, working on this. And here is showing the model, the teacher. And so this is from 4th to 8th grade, 2 schools, low socioeconomic status schools in Santiago. There is just starting to return to school and think about this problem. And here are the post-tests. For example, select the sequence with most infections on day 3. So you have 1, 2, A, B, C, D situations. Which one in day 3 they have more infected people? So they have to think about the spread of the infection and the different situation with different density and different number of people. And here also for sequence B, this sequence, that's the graph of the number infected through the days. So this is a situation, which graph represents this? This is for 4th and 8th grade students, not that easy. So they have to connect with the mask curriculum as well. And another one, in N2, this is situation, how many people are without mask? See, some are big balls, some are small balls. So this is a question for you. Which one do you think represent best people without mask? So there's a core idea of computational modeling and computational thinking to think in terms of very simple agents, and this is called agents-based modeling, something we want to introduce in the curriculum. And we see here the pandemic as a big opportunity, motivational opportunity to introduce this. And besides that, when you read at the newspapers, most of them talk about modeling and the curves and flatten the curve, and they have different assumptions behind the mechanism of infection. Another question in M2, this is M2, how many people are infected in day 3? So somehow every day they move this. So second day this, third day. So this is has to be with the mobility of the people in this situation. So somehow they have to model the computational model with the density, the use of mask or not mask, and mobility of the people. And they have to somehow put together all this. And so the final open questions, these are some more open questions. What problems of limitation do this model have to better represent reality? So they have to think of that. So is this model good enough? How would you include some people who die in the model? The model didn't include people that died. And also, how would you include some recovered people in the model? This simple model didn't have people that recovered. So the performance was good, 78%. Limitation answers the kids wrote in the computer. Everyone would have to touch each other. Limitation of my value is that the infection is minimal. I think they are good since they are easy to understand, but the mobility should be moving in different directions. But apart from that, I think, okay, it's okay. Also, they did peer review that in everything that open answer that kids wrote, they were reviewed by their peers, and they commented about like what it other did. For example, sounds good to me, but I think it's better if it wasn't so simple. So it's commenting about the model the other kid was producing. So conclusions, students were able to analyze the model and connect with corresponding graphs. Students understood how the transmission mechanisms of the model includes critical factors such as density, population mobility, and phase map use. Students were aware of some of the limitations of the model. Students proposed some strategy and representation to include deaths and recovery. Students and teachers were highly motivated with the lesson. So in conclusion, we have that it is feasible to integrate computational thinking that has something new in the curriculum with educational challenges. So we see here that is an opportunity, and a big opportunity to integrate this in the curriculum, computational thinking, mathematics, and science. So that's my presentation. Thank you very much. So should I be at 8 minutes?
Yeah, exactly. Thank you, Roberto. Thank you for the presentation and for that modeling. Please remind everyone to ask questions in Q&A box. And now we invite Roberto González Perilli from the Faculty of Information and Communication, University of the Republic from Uruguay. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Fernando, not Roberto. It's all right, the same. First of all, I want to sorry for my English. I'm quite out of practice, but I expect that everyone can understand me. Well, I have thanks to the organizer for inviting me to such an important encounter. I think it's extremely valuable that we can have the chance to exchange views and experience across the region regarding the opportunities and challenges that technology poses when facing educational perspectives, especially in the scenarios we had to live in last years, talking about the pandemic. Well, I'm very glad to share this space with such important researchers. I didn't know who will be at the seminar, so I quite embarrassed for the level of my partners. But I want to contribute with my experience. Me and my team have been working in last 6 years developing educational applications for our public system in Uruguay. Specifically aimed to fit the Plan Ceibal devices. Plan Ceibal is a program in Uruguay in the framework of one laptop per child. So every child in public school is receiving a tablet or a laptop. And we developed tangible interaction devices. This is something quite unusual, but our aim was to provide, I think you can see this video, to combine the use of tangible manipulatives, concrete material, combine it with technology, with these tablets that are provided to the children. We expected that this kind of solution helped to the actors, the children's teachers, to approach technology that will be easier using these manipulatives that are often used in the earlier grades in school. But the story was much more complex, and we are still working on it, and how make the teachers to appropriate the technology and really use it in their instruction. In this year, we're working in a participatory design project. That means involve the users in the development of the applications, and users in this case mean teachers and children. This has been extremely rich and interesting experience. We recently finished a round of almost 20 interviews with mostly first grade teachers, when we asked them about their needs, their experience with technology, especially during the pandemic, and whether they feel that technology can be useful in their daily practice. So we have a lot of information of interest here. We're also running workshops, but in those interviews, we were really fascinated by the effort and commitment of the teachers trying to connect with children, something that was very difficult during the pandemic, mostly in low-income areas where people doesn't have easy access to internet or even devices. Well, we learn a lot from them. No, they use email, WhatsApp, phone calls, an incredible effort, to keep the children connected to school. Something related, with what Silvia was explaining, how many people drops in this scenario. And something that we have noticed is that the teachers were quite alone in their efforts. They will need more support from the system. This is something that thinking about what the system can do in order to foster this kind of actions. We think that it could be important to have some teams or some guidelines or even provide some services that are lacking in some crucial population. I mean, in many neighborhoods, they lack internet connection. People usually don't have a Wi-Fi connection at their homes. And if you are thinking in how to use technology in these kinds of scenarios to keep on going with instruction, it would be crucial to have a free available internet connection. During the pandemic, some people in our country was claiming for the government to provide this kind of services, but this measure wasn't taken. I think that's a very bad decision, because of course we are all concerned with the increasing gap, in our societies in terms of education. If we value this and we want to do something about it, I think we need to make things easier to people, to connect. As I told before, in our country we have this one laptop per child program that somehow solves the access to the devices, for the children to connect to the different platforms, to use different applications. But something we have, something we know is that many of those devices are broken. In a class when you have like 25 children, that everyone should have a tablet or a laptop, half of them are broken. This is something dramatic because they cannot use these devices that do help them. So other thing I think that the lesson that we have learned is that it's important to provide devices. I think this is a great measure, at least in our country. This have helped us to reduce the gap of technological access, but those devices have to be the harder as possible. They should fall from 1 meter and still survive to this. This is key, because what children end up doing is using the parents' cell phones, but sometimes the parents doesn't have the access to data to connect, and sometimes they changes the devices, so the teacher loses the phone number, so they disconnect. So I think this is something very important too. The other thing that will be important in order to foster the possibilities of technology to assist in these difficult scenarios is to give more guidelines to the teachers, but also to the parents and children about how to use the different platforms available. This is something that happened in our country. They are very valuable platforms to connect between people, to present homeworks, to practice with application in maths, language, but sometimes people doesn't know how to enter this platform. And so many teachers developed very interesting solutions, sending videos by WhatsApp, for instance, but I think the system could develop, and even in an international collaboration framework, we can develop some resources to make this even simpler. Also, it's clear that in the pandemic era, many teachers approached technology in a way they didn't before. So here there are some opportunities emerging, as Aisen said at the beginning of the meeting, and I think this is something we have to take in advantage, but we have to learn some lessons. I think there more support from the system could be needed. And in our country, teachers had a lot of autonomy to solve their problems, and this somehow releases from some pressure, but as at the same time, they have a lot of responsibility in order to solve the problems. So it was, of course, a very stressful situation for them. So ending my presentation, I think that in this scenario we have lived, we have seen how technology can be very useful for the communities. I'm thinking in the earlier ages where children need more support. Older children have more autonomy, of course, but I think we have to clean up some which are the lessons which we should learn. People need devices to connect. People need internet connection, mostly in low-income areas, and also teachers need guidelines, resources, and also some guidance about how to combine technological resources with traditional instruction. Sometimes this link is quite missed, and that's made teachers just not to use what they have available. Well, I finished it right now. I don't know how many times I spoke.
Thank you, Fernando, and sorry for missing your name.
No,
we will talk about those challenges at the end of all presentations. Now we give I give word to Anne Burke from the Faculty of Education, Memorial University, Canada. Anne?
Okay, I think it's this one here. Is that it? Okay, can everybody see my screen?
Okay. Yes, we can. Thank you.
Okay, so let's just start the video. Okay, well, good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Anne Burke. I'm from Memorial University in Canada. It's the, I'm sharing a picture of the East Coast of Canada. So we are the most eastern part of Canada and in the oldest city in North America. So just very briefly to share what my research is about. Currently, I'm looking at ways to augment children's voices in schools and in society, and in particular, the importance of makerspaces and allowing for that ability for children to share their voices, looking at early learning and the possibilities for civic engagements and environmental social entrepreneurship, as well as different forms of cultural representations, and how making can be conceptualized through STEAM. So I will talk a little bit about that today, as well as I'll talk about my work at the Discovery Play Center, and then the ADVOS project, which is really about how do we include children's voices and why that's important for social cohesion. So the first slide that I'm sharing here is from the Discovery Play Center. It's a center that is set up at Memorial University, and it's Its objective is really to invite schools from the surrounding area. Many of the schools very close to the university are schools that have a high diverse immigrant populations, as well as low socioeconomic status and very high needs. So the Discovery Play Center really focused on looking at STEAM initiatives. In this one at the top, you see a child that is learning how to do circuit play using Disney princesses. And then in the bottom is a project. As I said, a lot of my work is with cultural institutions. And in particular, with this one was looking at how to connect young learners to the ocean, understanding, advancements in technology and looking at remote access to ocean mapping, as well as understanding what has happened to the coral reefs off Newfoundland due to pollution. So children created an exhibit, and this was curated at the Geo Center in St. John's. In the top right corner, you'll see this is actually the Rooms. The Rooms is a public gallery. It has a public art space, an archive, and a museum. And they are a partner with Memorial University and the Discovery Play Center. And what their role is to invite schools and to look at what it means making, cultural making. In this particular example, there are 3D representations of children's communities. So you'll see that there's a church representation, as well as schools in the back and other, heritage sites that children chose to make. What's really important about the invitation to these particular evenings is often with schools and children who had never been to art galleries or museums or archives. I think it's really important to talk a little bit about children's digital literacies. In thinking about, the COVID recovery, it's really important to look at where children really ended up going, where they really required for them to expand their digital literacies to keep up with most elements of their own lives. Even looking at pre-pandemic world, we started to look at what children have been doing. Even young children became very accustomed to conducting their primary peer socialization online through Zoom, TikTok, other platforms. And even post-pandemic, we're seeing even more digital play that's happening. It's important because we do see that as a form of socialization, but in particular, we're looking at social cohesion. And what does that mean for children, their families, as well as for schools? In this particular slide, I'd like to share the ADVOS project. And this is an important project because we're looking at, community practice. A lot of my work's in public engagement. It's looking at how we can bring cultural institutions, teachers together, and young children together. And in this particular project, there's an understanding that children, all children, often children from Indigenous and immigrant backgrounds greatly benefit from play-based and art-based approaches, especially for enhancing voices. So in this particular slide, you can see that we're looking at how children and educators use artifacts, meaning photos, objects, drawings, to tell stories about their lives, identities, histories, and as well as what that means for children in their classrooms, especially for new children that have arrived in Canada. So that has been very, very important. Just an overview of what our research is doing. Again, like all of our researchers and all the researchers have noticed, we do have many teams and many of us work together. So the ADVOS team is one that comes from Finland, as well as the UK and Canada. And we are funded by many different funding bodies. So it's online and digital approaches with narrative digital storytelling, which is the key component. And we're looking at diverse childhoods and how important they are in children's lives, and how play and land-based pedagogies for very young children, so that would be children from ages 5 to say the age of 10, how this benefits them. So just talking about social cohesion and how important that is within our research, we found that there were challenges that were brought forth in the research, by teachers in trying to teach online during the pandemic. So this was important. This study was intended to be in the classroom in person, but we pivoted to online and learned so many things. We talked a lot about with these teachers, particularly in these schools, which are quite challenged, how they could not get access to, didn't get a lot of support from government for digital hardware that was needed, not to mention the understanding that not everybody has access to Wi-Fi. Teachers were really plagued with protocol COVID expectations in the classroom, no consideration for resources, administration that was stretched, But teachers, I have to say, that really moved forward and did amazing things online in school and with children. I really learned to respect and learn more about children from being online with them in their own social and family spaces. So our aims are really to look at a deeper understanding of what innovative pedagogical approaches and how they can facilitate the voice and agency of all children. So thinking about how children come to know who they are and the different identities that they actually carry with them. So in this particular slide, you'll see in the right-hand side, this was partially part of the ocean's exploration, and the children had created a sea sweeper. We have a harbor that is completely polluted, and the children decided, based on a Dyson vacuum, they worked with I guess, engineering students to make the replica, and then they actually presented this to the mayor of the city in ways that they thought that they could clean their ocean. So a way for agency to be taken and understanding the importance of our environment. I think that children's voices are really important and central to this particular study, and especially with cultural institutions. Of course, it's participatory approaches that we're looking at. We're looking at local land, local histories and connections to the land as well. Diverse immigrant refugee culture and languages, and how we can revitalize that culture and revitalize that language. So many of these children have never ever been to a museum or had been to the art gallery because their parents, would not think that they belong there. So the idea here is to really include those voices. And you'll see a toothy grin that's down here on the right-hand side. And this is based on some of the children's literature books that young teachers are using. The best part of me is my mouth can smile and laugh to people. So we're seeing how arts-based practices, as provided in this particular photo that was created by the child and the parent, and the teacher, are now being curated in a national gallery. For them to see how important their voice is. So we're looking at power relations need to be recognized, and how, inclusion and social cohesion is so important to children's social development as well. The natural maker-learner continuum is part of the work that we do. Right now, we work with Brilliant Labs, which is logos represented in the right-hand side, and with Cloudberry Forest School as part of this initiative. So looking at how we can actually have children become engaged eco-citizens. And I think that in anything, we've seen a real turn to that outside learning and engaging with the environment as a classroom. And that's been so important to our research and project. Just moving on to the importance of play. So it's complex, dynamic, it generates opportunities for civic engagement and of course, open-mindedness to community-mindedness and enhancing early learning beginnings. But I think what's really important is to look at what actually happened to children and how that impacted how children come to learn and know and their own identities. These are safety restrictions that were impacting children during the time of COVID. You'll see that the socialization of something and safe activities were recommended. Many of these activities ended up going online. In particular, we found that looking at children's mental health was really, really important. And we're very concerned about, a lot of the discourse in Canada around what misschooling took place, and not seeing that children's social emotional health and well-being really could be addressed through the well-being and play. So this is just an article in the conversation that my colleague and I wrote regarding that, and thinking about resilience, because our focus is on resilience and how that's a major factor for everyone during the pandemic. I'd like to close now as moving forward. And this is the findings. Looking at the ADVOS project, we do really hope that we can bring more understanding how children's voices can be inclusive in schools and in cultural institutions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anna. Very interesting to hear about voices of children. Now we will move to Alejandra Floyd from the Catholic University of Asunción. Alejandra, the floor is yours.
Hello, thank you. Hello, I'm very happy to be here sharing the experiences that we had in Paraguay with everyone. I will talk a bit about mental health and education during the pandemic and the initiatives that came from scientists and the scientific world to assist in the developments and see how we could help move forward. So one of the first ones was the one that was called COVID-19 Mental Health and Education Team. This is a team that emerged organically from, it was like probably 3 days after lockdown was decreed in Paraguay. Researchers we had a meeting and said, hey, we don't want to be looking from up there from the ivory tower. We want to roll our sleeves up and get to work and see what we can do. We have a lot to contribute. So we formed a scientific committee with the support of Conicet that even set a resolution and named us so that we could have official authority in the country. And I was the leader for the mental health and education team. So quickly, we set up a call for volunteers and we formed a team of 121 volunteers. They were all professionals in relevant areas, such as psychologists, teachers, psychiatric nurses, social workers, psychiatrists, occupational medicine, from which we said, okay, what can we contribute from the side of science? And the main things that we did was we gathered and disseminated evidence-based strategies that we could help like individuals to cope with the pandemic. So we plastered the newspapers and the media and TV with what the science have to say on how we can deal with lockdown, how we can cope with uncertainty, how we can keep our mental health in a time where we are stripped from community, which is something that really sustains well-being. Also try to give help with transitions to telehealth for practitioners. So because there was a surge in need for psychological intervention. So it was, how do we adapt the protocols that we used to have in the office to telehealth? And right now, most psychologists and psychiatrists in the country offer online appointments, which at the beginning we did a quick survey and it was less than 10%. As well to guidelines for behavioral management that would help public health. And so how can we impact public awareness of the issues and how can we deal from the behavioral standpoint? So at the beginning of the pandemic, for example, all of the institutional emergency protocols for the major institutions that dealt with mental health and even for hospitals were based on what was the best available evidence at the time. And institutions and people in those institutions, in charge of those institutions who were in this team, shared the evidence with each other so that everyone could have sound protocols for their institutions. Because we saw a deep interest in people to learn more and a bit as well as a coping strategy for uncertainty, we hosted a psychoeducational webinar series where we had more than 5,000 participants from early 2020 to early 2021. I don't recall, the final numbers were about 150 webinars that we organized. And so those were both open to the public, to the general public, so that in the place of as health promotion, as well as customized for specific audiences. And we found that the psychoeducational format online worked for people. We used different avenues such as like closed Zooms, which worked better for specific audiences because they felt like they were invited, as well as streamed in Facebook Live and streamed in Instagram. And we tried everything to see what worked best. And even launched an action research program regarding mental health promotion. Because when we closed our borders in Paraguay from March to June, the people that needed to get back in the country did mandatory quarantine in government quarantine shelters. And so we quickly saw the need before mental health deteriorated in those situations. So we implemented a protocol that was refined through the iterations of like action research, where you figure out the problem, you design a solution, you implement the solution, you gather feedback, and you move on like a never-ending spiral of what works. And we find that this actually aligns with the research priority 5.1 of how can communities be optimally engaged in decision-making to strengthen social cohesion and mitigate the impact of emergencies. So these were the highlights of this topic, and this team, and it became a well-known team in no time in Paraguay, to the point that we even made a stretch into evidence-based public policy. I was the advisor to the health minister of Paraguay between September 2020 and March 2021 as part of a think tank advisory where with 2 epidemiologists, 1 general MD, a computer scientist, and me as a psychologist. Our task force was like giving behavioral management strategies for the public health measures that we're implementing in a country that doesn't have many resources, and the people believe very strongly in what the one next door says. So we try to focus on the power of community, of taking care of your kin, taking care of the people next to you, not just yourself, because as a culture, we're very self-sacrificed. And so we were trying to increase the buy-in for implementation of those strategies and see like, how can we get people to willingly put on masks? How can we get people to willingly wash their hands and not just because someone is telling them to do? To the end that, as I always worked at the intersection of health and education as a psychologist, we formed a back to school task force with the Ministry of Public Health and Social Welfare, where I was, and with the Ministry of Education and Sciences, to decide, okay, kids need to get back to school. That was one of the strongest cases that we made because we had been in lockdown and with virtual school that was not really working for about a year. So that was actually aligns with the research priority that put that you can see that there at the bottom. And let me tell you a little bit more about this task force and what we accomplished. So we started revising worldwide scientific evidence. Okay, what was done where and what worked where, and how can we extrapolate that to our culture, our context, the things that we have in our classrooms, and balancing the needs of a very loud group in society that wanted kids to be back without masks and without bubbles and like back to normal, and a big group in society that did not want in-person school because like we were said that we were going to have blood in our hands, like children's blood in our hands by sending them back to school. So revision of those measures took into account not only the physical danger, but also the social and emotional dangers to the future of the country. And we decided on a very strict hybrid education protocol that was feasible. So since the Minister of Education has standardized classroom sizes for most schools in the country, it was feasible to dictate a maximum number for bubbles. And so we capped that at 15, whereas we know that other countries had like 20, 22, even 28, or we capped it at 15, which is very low for Paraguay, where sometimes we have class sizes of 40 and 50. So that inevitably left hybrid education. Face masks were started at age 3. And so, and the protocol that you see there was heavily focused on masking, social distancing, ventilation, and air circulation in classrooms, and hand washing. So we had a decision tree with very, very clear indications for isolation, for principals, for teachers, for families. Everyone knew what they were supposed to do. So that led to it being a very successful plan. We did not have school-related outbreaks, like even in the toughest moment of the pandemic, where schools were left to their, like they had the ability to make the choice whether to go fully virtual or stay hybrid. No adjustments were necessary to the plan. And so we think this is because of the joint work that we did all together and revising scientific evidence, whereas we were creating it at the same time. And on the last topic that I wanted to touch on very quickly is a longitudinal study, a trend study that we did with my university students on coping and mental health and in university students in general, which was a population very heavily impacted by the pandemic because because of the disruption to their online school education and without very quick provisions for us. So, but we had 3 waves in measurement where we captured about 500 people per wave, a bit more, a bit less. 3/4 of them were women. And most universities had already switched to online classes. And we saw something that was, on one hand, hopeful, gave us hope, and on the other hand, it was a bit scary. So the most used strategies, the most used coping skills of what, from the ones we assessed with a validated psychometric questionnaire, were acceptance of the situation, positive reframing, like looking at things in a positive lens, active coping, which is finding something to do. Everyone, like bread making and knitting and tending to plants that everyone took during quarantine. Yeah, that. As well as distraction. And those were the most used and the most effective because they were related to lower levels of depression, anxiety, and stress. Although to a very small degree, as you can see. The least used and least effective were behavioral disconnection, which is like, okay, this is happening, but I'm not engaging. I don't care. I'll pretend. Denial, which is I'll pretend it doesn't exist. This is not happening. COVID is not so serious. Substance use or even self-blame for the things that go wrong. And those were related to higher levels of anxiety, depression, anxiety, and stress, and with a bit higher correlation numbers, as you can see. And this was like this in all three waves. What scared us, though, is that in all three waves, we still see very troubling scores for anxiety, depression, and stress. Those are all above cutoff scores for risk of depression, anxiety, and stress, risk of psychopathology. And the mean and even the standard deviation, they're all above the cutoffs. And the tendency is still going. Like if we look at it linearly, that it's a significant upward linear trend. Inverted U-shaped quadratic trend. And so we would need the following measurement to see if this is a trend that stays. What we see from this is that we still need to pay attention to mental health in educational settings, not because the pandemic is over, so to say, like we're going more to like normal spaces, even though like we're getting more into in-person gatherings, we're vaccinated. Mental health is still suffering. It's still suffering heavily. And despite people using helpful strategies, they are using the strategies that we know works. They are using the strategies that help them. And still their depression, anxiety, and stress is high. And so mental health in educational settings is a call for action and urgent action. We need to keep on working on that. Thank you very much. I appreciate it, and I'll be open for questions at the end.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. It's mental health is an important topic, I think, and not so many talk about it, unfortunately. So we will go back to you later. Now we have our last but not least speaker, Lorena Barberia, from the University of Sao Paulo. Lorena?
Yes.
The floor is yours.
Thank you. So my presentation, I hope everyone can see my slides now. Yes? Can you see? Yes?
Yes. Yes, thank you.
So I'm a political scientist, and I'm going to switch a little bit the focus, because what I'm going to talk about is the research that we've undertaken in our group, which is to map the policies that were implemented. Because I think one of the things, and to explain kind of the motivation of our work, is before we evaluate impacts on education, before we evaluate if school reopenings are leading to outbreaks, we really need to measure what policies are being implemented and what the effects of those policies are. So I think that's the effort that we have done in my group. I work on quantitative public policy evaluations, and across the pandemic, in several different components of the pandemic response, we've tried to map the differences that exist in Brazil between the federal, state, and municipal levels. So here I'm going to just briefly to underscore why is it important to do this research and to do granular research that looks at the federation? Because in the context of Brazil, we have a highly decentralized public education system in which there's a lot of autonomy for setting policy at the local government level. And We also have heterogeneity in terms of responsibility. So preschool and primary school education are the responsibility of municipal governments. State programs have overlapping responsibilities with municipalities for primary school programs, and they are also responsible largely for secondary education. And there's mandatory spending that's capped on education. But what's important to realize as well is that because of the economic contraction that suffered education, that meant that during the pandemic, because we were in a major economic period of retraction, that also means that there was reduced spending for education when we needed to actually spend more because we had new challenges emerging. There's 61 million Brazilians that are age 19 or younger. So we're talking about a third of the population of Brazil. And the majority of this population, since we have only 8 minutes and I'm going to try to go fast, the majority of this population across all levels of education is in the public education system. So we really need to map and to understand what's going on in the public education systems at all levels. At the federal level, and it's very striking to note this, there was an absence of a clear, coordinated, and coherent approach in education, similar to what we saw in health. So there was no remote education guidelines or coordination by the Ministry of Health at the federal level. There was uneven disbursements of funding for state and municipal governments. And that meant that also it was very difficult for them to align and create new programs in the first year of the pandemic. Reopening protocols by the federal government were only issued in October 2020. So fairly late, if we think about that, the first case was diagnosed in Brazil in February 2020. It took a long time for us to start to create these protocols for reopening. And there was a lack of coordination, which we see at the state and municipal level, of what is the safety protocols and what are the guidelines that the Ministry of Health is mandating for contact tracing and for different other policies, and what the Ministry of Education advises. So basically, just very quickly to show, these are the school closures. It's a ranking of, it's an index that goes from 0 to 100. And the key message is to just show that consistently, and that's why we think it's really important to understand and to underscore. When people say, oh, schools were closed in Brazil, or schools for the most of the pandemic, the fact is that there is a lot of heterogeneity across Brazil. The months that we had more consistency across the federation was in the first semester. But as you can see from this map, the darker colors is a more stringent level of school closures, and lighter colors is if there's a less mandating of on-site school closures. What we can see is there's a lot of heterogeneity that starts to emerge in the second semester of 2020. This is just looking at major state capitals, underscoring the same issue of heterogeneity across 2020. And as a result of that, one of the things that we sought to map in our research project is to look at what are the policies, since we had on-site school closures, what were the policies that were implemented in order to introduce remote education programs in the public school systems. And so we looked at and we developed an indicator, an index again, that is the quality of remote education programs. We look at 4 main policies. What means were adopted for broadcasting classes? What means or what policies were introduced to increase access? How were students supervised? And what is the extent of coverage of the program? Kindergarten, elementary, and high school is part of the policies. And this indicator, which we continue to monitor on a daily basis for all states and for all state capitals in Brazil, what we see and what I think is really important to underscore is it took a relatively long time for these programs to get off the ground in 2020. And if we think about here that the highest grade you could get for a remote education program is 10, and the lowest grade is 0. And what we see is, again, there's a lot of heterogeneity in terms of the states. This is looking at the quality of state programs for remote education, which consistently scored higher than state capital or state municipal programs. And what we can see is that in 2020, these programs were much lower quality than 2021. So by 2021, we see a marked improvement in remote education programs. But one of the issues that has been really underscored, if you can see, we have each column is shaded in 3 colors. Yellow is how students are being supervised. The lighter blue is access, and the darker blue is transmission. And so I think what's critical to underscore, if you look at the middle bar, the middle bar is access. And we saw that there was very little investments undertaken to increase access so that students could be participating in remote education in public school programs across Brazil. And there's some states where we see really consistent, still marked problems in terms of the type of transmission and the type of access that students have to education during the pandemic. As we're also interested in monitoring what is happening in terms of reopening protocols, we developed and we have an index that monitors 8 different policies that looks at different components of what are the biosafety protocol that is being mandated or adopted by the state or the municipal government to open schools safely. And we try to signal, again, that these policies are fairly complex. We have to remember that many of these programs and initiatives are activities that schools weren't undertaking in Brazil before the pandemic. Remote learning was in a very nascent stage in Brazil in the public school system. There's new challenges thinking about, for example, the fixed space that schools have for classrooms and how to increase social distancing inside of that infrastructure. So we have kind of moderate policies which focus on transportation, remote learning, social distancing, and hygiene. And then what we call high complexity interventions. And those are masking, ventilation, monitoring the quality of air in schools, vaccination, and testing. And so we've mapped each of these policies. And what I'm going to show in the next slide is, in this slide, I'm showing the score of the reopening protocols, again, on a 0 to 100 for each state safety protocol. So what we're looking at is across the states of the Brazilian Federation, the 26 states, and the different colors in the total column is mapping what the subcomponent is of the emphasis and what is being done on each specific indicator. So what is being done with respect to mask, what is being done with respect to ventilation, immunization, goes into an aggregate index, and we can say that, again, there's a lot of heterogeneity. This is looking at the first semester of 2020. We're in the process right now of updating this indicator for the second semester of 2021. And what we can see is there's a lot of heterogeneity across the year and across states. Some programs, but no state reaches 100 in terms of its protocol. And in this moment, what we know is that many of these protocols are actually they're loosening restrictions, reducing social distancing, reducing some of the policies that were implemented that were very important in these protocols for them getting higher scores. And we have to remember that the population in Brazil that is below 11 is not vaccinated, and there's no vaccine that is approved and available for those students. So these are still very highly vulnerable context in which we're very worried about this. But again, to underscore the issue of the federal government and the issue of why it's been a problem, the federal government's safety protocol is has a much lower mean than the state mean in terms of the protocols. So we see that consistently, again, the federal government has failed to be a leader in helping to kind of propose safer protocols and coordinate efforts across states. And the same thing happens for cities. Now we're looking at the capitals, of all of the 26 states of Brazil. And you can see again that there's a lot of heterogeneity in terms of municipal schooling. So this is just kind of a very quick overview to try to show our research and show what we're trying to do. All of these indicators and the data that we map are available for anyone to use. And we hope that people use this because we really want to propose these indicators to help guide conversations and improve public policies. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lorena. Maybe you can share then links in a chat or somewhere so
Yes.
we can have an access to your data. Thank you for all 6 presenters. Just to recap, we started with Silvia that were talking about some study that they were doing at schools about how the pandemic affected schools, the rate of dropouts, how the schools are connected with or how they are acceptable for the use of WhatsApp, etc., and online education. To me, for example, one of the outcome you showed that there were about 56% of the people respondents that didn't want to connect because they didn't feel well, that they were depressed, etc. I think it's related what Alejandra was talking about related with the mental health. I think it's we can talk about it. Roberto talked about modeling that they did, the mathematical modeling to explain the pandemics and how it works, how the virus, I think it's a very interesting way to explain not only pandemics. Through pandemics is a good example probably because we are all living it now, but I think it's once they understand it through pandemic, it could be very useful too. I wonder though how whether you use some mechanism for apps for that to explain better, or whether there are some digital tools to be to work this out or to be available, this model for broader population. Then Fernando spoke also about their work with digital device and tangible elements. So I think this is also, you started to do it before pandemic, but I think it's very, very useful if we can actually see and see some results, in how many schools did you use it, what was the outcome of that, etc. I think it's very, very interesting. And the topic that you brought is inequality of access of internet, not only device, but I think the first is also internet access is also very important for the pandemic showed us that we have I think in all countries there are some level of inequality in terms of equipment, availability of equipment for kids, and in terms of availability of access for internet, a physical infrastructure in this sense. Then Anne talk about children's voice and the Advost project. I wonder whether, I think it's a great idea to connect also. I see that you also related not only with culture, but also with indigenous cultures. I think it's a very important element. And I wonder whether you have some studies or you are planning to do modeling for, because to have a children's voice heard before pandemic and during pandemic and after, maybe there is a different techniques probably needed. So maybe it's also whether you have analyzed it and what techniques are more useful and what not. We came to Alejandra, who talked about mental health. I think mental health is the issue of the pandemic, not only for kids, but also for adults. So I was surprised how many webinars you did. If I remember, it was 150. It's incredible. So applaud the work. And the mental health, don't know whether your studies have included only students or also students and teachers, how was the replies, because when we are talking about education, many times we talk about students' how they accepted, or their parents. But we also have to admit that the teachers it's very hard on teachers as well, I think. And what Fernando actually mentioned, that way the teachers in Uruguay, they went out to call in students and to keep in connection. So I think it's these examples are also true for many other countries. And last but not least, Lorena talked about policies and the lack of probably availability, or not the low reactions from the federal governments probably brought. I understand that if there is a more coordinated central approach to the procedures and rules on all topics related to pandemic, not only procedures for transport, schooling, online education, back into school, etc. So that each state government had to come up with their own procedures. So probably that's why also there is a very broad diversity of replies, etc. So I wonder whether you have in Brazil you have an element where you can actually provide a mechanism for different states to share their experiences and maybe to share their platforms of their experience and what policies they have introduced, whether they were successful, etc. And you, as I have all states analyzed, maybe you know better what examples are the best and how to introduce it to others. So that's overall kind of summary and little bit questioning from my side. I would like all speakers to open your, you are all open to your cameras, and if you have some comments, some questions, I will be checking whether there are some questions from the audience as well. But if you can elaborate a little bit more on what I have just told you, and also talk about a little bit about international cooperations. I know Silvia talked about international cooperation that's in your projects, but maybe also other exponents, presenters can also, and also Anna talk a lot about cooperation that they have. Maybe also others also can touch about whether you had some level of international cooperation, whether you use some comparison with other countries, or you use some publications from other researchers from other countries, etc. Thank you. So who, okay, Roberto?
Yes, well, thank you everyone for the presentation. I have several questions, but first of all, you said Chaparilla, it's about use of technology. So I wonder if Lorena also look at the use of the smartphones. I didn't see there, because for us, smartphones will be very important, because even in low socioeconomic status schools, kids, families, they have a smartphone already and they have access to smartphones. So we have adjusted what different activities for smartphone. And a question for Anne is, we were working with the University of Jyväskylä in Finland as well. I know some people in Lapland about outdoor pedagogies using smartphone. And also we have been working in Peru with, do you know IDRC? It's International Development Research Center from Canada, for the government. We're working, and now we have like over 100,000 students in Peru in an IDRC project using smartphone just during the pandemic. So, and you know, I think this device is critical because everybody has it, everybody has it at home. We've been trying to work in this case using these devices, even if you don't have internet. So just partial internet, maybe once a week, if you go maybe to a mall or to some place, you have. So I'd like to know about Lorena, and if you have experience using what is the use of smartphone during the pandemic, and finally about modeling. What we think is that once you understand better the mechanism, and when you have to model this, do a computational model, you have to understand better, for example, mask Alexandra talked about the importance of masks. Then the idea is that once you understand better the mechanism, then it's more probable that you will follow the measures that health authority, is trying to that everybody will follow. Think about the vaccines. If you think, this is, you have a wrong model, it's not contamination as we show in the modeling, then maybe you will won't follow measures like vaccination measures. So my question for Lorena is that if they look at smartphone, how is they being used during the pandemic? For Anne, about this IDRC, if she works with that, and we can collaborate in projects like we do already with Finland and with Canada. And Alexandra, about this also, the mask. And finally, for Fernando, I have a question. Since we use smartphones, then in the family, the kids share the smartphones. So we got a problem we didn't have before with technology, because the same kid uses the same smartphone, because just one smartphone per family. So, logging and all that, we have all kind of trouble that, and if you have that kind of problems as well. So that's what my comments and questions.
So who jumps in first? Alejandra?
Yeah, I can go. So talking a little bit about the questions I heard from you and from Roberto. Regarding teachers, we did survey teachers, okay? We did do a lot of studies with teachers, both from the COVID-19, the mental health team, where we had a specific, even in the team, we had a specific task force dedicated to teachers. And so they were in contact with teachers from different types of schools in the country and seeing what their needs were. And so many of those closed webinars that we organized were directed to teachers, both directly to their schools or even through the Ministry of Education, with whom we partnered to offer a series on teacher stress management, teacher strategies. We're very concerned with preventing burnout, because we realized that teachers were doing the absolute best they had. They were all overworked, and they were still getting a lot of backlash from society because education wasn't sufficient. And that was not because of anything on their behalf, but because of connectivity issues, because of things that were beyond their reach. So, for example, speaking about smartphones were crucial here in Paraguay, yet not all families had access to smartphones. So what did some teachers do? They walked to, especially in rural areas, there's instances of teachers walking to the school, grabbing materials, walking to the students' houses to deliver them, and then walking back once a week to collect them. And so that is not on their list of tasks, and they did it anyway. And so there's countless examples like that. The schooling for the ones that did have smartphones organized itself in WhatsApp groups. There was a WhatsApp group for science, 7th grade, WhatsApp with students and parents, so that sometimes the student had a smartphone and the parent didn't know how to access it. Sometimes only a parent had a smartphone. Sometimes only a neighbor had a smartphone. And so the neighbor would be added to the science group so that she could go to the little neighbor's house and say, hey, Juancito, you have science homework here, copy it. And so the kids had to copy the strategies and then solve the problem, take a picture and upload it to WhatsApp, because they couldn't come up with a platform very quickly. For the ones that didn't have smartphone access, the ministry created a portal that was, and from the portal, the online lessons were broadcasted through national television and national radio. There was a lot of efforts, but they weren't coordinated enough so that it could feel like a massive plan. So it was kind of disjointed here and there. And so it wasn't as used as we would have liked it to be used. So in that regard, this is how they were working on that. But the other thing is that about college students, as we work in a big university, in a big team, we split, and the principal investigator for assessing like teacher stress and teacher well-being and college instructor, etc., was a colleague, and they found similar results. Teachers were very stressed and doing the best they could.
Thank you, Alejandra. Thanks, Roberto, for several questions. So, Anne, please.
So I'll just.
Anna, we don't hear you.
And the teachers went, oh, can you hear me? Oh.
Now, yes. Now you mute yourself. Sorry.
How am I now? Can you hear me now? All right. So basically in Eastern Canada, last March, all the children went home, the teachers went home, and there was really, like many places, there was no plan. So parents were very concerned. So the school board was putting off messages on how to engage with your child at home. And those parents who did not have access to digital platforms or even any kind of tablet, of course, parents were doing, or teachers were doing the same, going to houses and bringing things to them. Those with mobile phones, it became very interesting, actually, because teachers were actually allowing for texting and allowing for information to be exchanged with their own phones, because very concerned for children. Another platform that was used a lot in the study was Twitter. So teachers were posting, information about what work had to be, completed at home, or resources, or where they could go to get things. This was really, really important as well. I think with the Twitter account too, another part, because it was a teacher action research that's still ongoing, one of the things that was really important was it was a way for them to bring some comfort to parents whose children were in school for the first time. They weren't allowed access to the building. They weren't allowed access on the parking lot. So it was a way for teachers to witness what learning was going on, showing them that their children were safe, because that was the biggest concern, especially with such a diverse population. A lot of parents who do not speak English and are struggling with language themselves. So we saw mobile phones used in that way. And then as the government became more aware of what the problem was or what the needs were, we found that tablets started to get into families' hands. But there was quite a time when a lot of parents were really struggling. So that's in regards to the use of technology. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Lorena, Silvia, Fernando, who wants? Lorena?
I can jump in. So
Yes.
I think one of the things to just talk about that is very important, I think exactly what we said, it's very expensive and inefficient in the middle of an emergency as massive as it is, with the second highest death toll in the world, as we have in Brazil, that each government is inventing their own protocol and learning the mistakes along the way. And so there's a lot of efficiencies of learning and sharing information across networks, and also of pulling resources, because we have to remember there's very poor municipalities, very poor states that didn't have the capacity to mount resilient education systems quickly in a pandemic. And so we could have learned a lot from sharing. I think, unfortunately, we don't see as much yet. And I think it's a lesson for the future, is that if we want to build better for the next time, we have to build capacities that we think more about how we can share information across different networks and across countries as well. Because I think that some of the curricula are very similar across countries, and that we could have thought about different strategies. Then I think what Roberto was talking about is, what struck us a lot in our research is that given the high dependency of cell phones, but also remembering that that cell phone is the only cell phone for the whole household. So it's very difficult to design an educational intervention where classes are being transmitted on the internet for 3 to 4 hours, and you expect, or that we have a number of different children in that household that need to rely on that phone to access the internet. So I think our research is trying to one of the things that we found is most of the states designed internet-based programs, assuming people were gonna be on a computer, not on a cell phone that is shared in the household. And I think what we need to think about is how do we design and think about reaching students in that context is challenging.
Thank you, Lorena. Silvia, would you like to comment something? Oh, Fernando.
Oh, well, I just want to answer Roberto's question about the cell phone, but my view is very similar than the one Alejandra was describing, and the dependency of many families to maybe one phone and a lot of strategies that emerged when people needed to access the information. But at the same time, I understand that as Alexandra and also Lorena explained, there was some lack of coordination, what the government was expected to happen with people and the solutions provided. I think it's quite dramatic because it's clear that in low income areas, people have those huge problems of accessibility, and you are thinking in sustained instruction by internet connection, platforms, online classes, but this ideal wasn't meet the reality, and there is a huge and widening gap between different parts of the society. I think it's very sad, I visited some schools and they had children that at the end of first grade doesn't know some 2-digit numbers, they doesn't know how to subtract, they have problems adding 2-digit numbers. So I think that we have a huge problem then, and we need more solution provided by the government to help think about what's better. Maybe international cooperation would be a solution, and maybe we can do something in this vein. But again, I was even surprised of the lack of coordination. Sometimes it's not that difficult. You have to start working very early, or even right now that we are thinking in a post-pandemic era. We don't know if we are going to have another wave, and this is going to start over again. So we need to have better solutions. This is what I feel about this.
Thank you. Silvia?
Yes, thank you. Yeah, I agree with many of you. I think that we need better solution, and it means a solid institution. I mean, dynamic and solid institution, and I think that policies, educational policies, should go in that way. And we work a lot with the research collaboration, and also we've been developing a lot of research with creative methods, art-based methods, and different art languages in our field work, and that comic was part of that work. I agree with you, Sharapia, that more than 50% of students that were sad. This is I think that the problem that the distance learning couldn't afford, and smartphone helped somehow because they shared the WhatsApp group, and it was a lot, but it was the smartphone couldn't resolve the teaching task, And I think that what it happened here is that we have had some kind of confusion between teaching and sending homework through the smartphone. And teaching is something and homework is another thing. So this is why I think that we need to think policies that could afford these challenges, you know, and knowing that with the cell phone we can be in contact, but teaching is another issue. And we need to rethink it in another way. So maybe, and this is why I chose to share that idea, that was the storytelling diary of the professor, because she went to the point about both, no? Links, you know, teaching and schooling is related to links, to make voices, children voices and young people be heard. So I think that we need to think how to make those bonds in another emergency situation or whatever possible. I don't know. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Silvia. Thank you. We have I have some questions for all of the presenters before we close up. So I would like to see how do you see the future for the digital connections in online education from now on in a non-pandemic situation, what we can adapt for the future, what do you think is good to adapt, what not, and also some other comments or some other policies probably that has to be adopted, the best maybe one or two that you think that should be adopted for the post-pandemic situation. I don't know whether we are now in post-pandemic or not, but I know that the situation between 2020 and 2021, from my personal experience, has improved. For example, at the beginning, I used to be a teacher for my child because teachers sent only homework, so we had to explain what does it mean, what is it about, etc. All parents had to do so, but with time, this teaching process improved, because at the beginning of pandemic we didn't have any teaching. We didn't receive teaching. We received homeworks. But now, although there is a combined situation, we receive teaching. We have some additional instructions. Parents also had some capacity building. Also, some schools are very innovative. They do classes like you, Alejandra, was doing for teachers. They do for parents as well. So there are different tools. So I want to see you. What do you see the future of digital solutions or digital apps in the post-pandemic or non-pandemic situation, and what policy do you think has to be adopted for in case we face other emergency, not necessarily pandemic? Thank you. It's for all. I don't know who wants to jump in first.
I would like to say something related to that. Thank you, Pia, and everybody. We're now I would like to talk about collaboration about this post-pandemic. We are now in a project with the Inter-American Development Bank and this Canadian Foundation at DRC. And they are, let's say, in Latin America, they are connected with CEIBAD. I think Fernando knows ADELA program. And we're working with ADELA in just that, how to collaborate. For example, we are Chilean, we're working also with Peru, how to use smartphones, and we use in very poor areas in Peru as well as in Chile. So adapt the platform to the smartphone thing. Second, about what Silvia was talking, is not doing Zoom lessons with smartphone. It's just maybe 1 or 2 minutes small video for the whole week explaining something. We're working in math, just that. Plus this homework issue that says Silvia. So the platform, the kids they're trying to make it to do 30 math exercises per week, just 30 math exercises per week. And we have not only to adapt the format, but also that the internet is very unreliable. So maybe you maybe once a week you get some internet access because you go to some place, that's all. So how to adapt to that? And now in the second year, I mean, this is the third year, but next year we're planning to do this again for the post-pandemic. So now that we have so many people have learned to use a smartphone in these homes, and we have this problem that just is one smartphone per family, and the kids just have to maybe use a couple of minutes, not more than that. So we would like to see who's interested in collaborating with the International Development Bank and IDRC and Adela, this program that is related with SABAD and IDRC, in these issues. Because, you know, we're looking who else could be interested, and at this moment we're only working with Chile and Peru, and maybe there are some Central American countries that are, and I understand they will fund these activities of collaboration, so it's a good opportunity.
Just to comment on Roberto, thank you very much. This is a great, your comment is very good. So we can, I don't know whether you are all connected, but if you are not, we can send the email so you can see each connection and you can actually talk between each other and connect directly. So just in case to follow up on Roberto's offer. Silvia?
No, I said perfect. Well, I can continue but I don't have too much to say now. I think that we need to think digital in not as in a magical way, you know. Digital itself by itself, it will not resolve our problem. We need to think how to use all these technologies, but will not resolve our problem by itself. So when I think about digital and about future, I think that we need to know that our policies should be thought without a magical idea in relation to digital technologies.
Okay, thank you. Anne?
I think it's really important that we start to look at teacher education. So just building on what Silvia said, you know, the teachers in our study were quite stressed. We talk about mental health and how difficult it was on them because it was such a demand for them to be able to develop skills so quickly that they needed in order to, you know, address, you know, the curriculum as well as families' needs. So I think we need to look a little bit more about not just, you know, with the technology, as Silvia said, but those pedagogical practices or how teachers are using, you know, different really innovative ways in the way that they're using technology to engage children in ways that they're used to learning. You're going to be not just sort of doing something on the screen, but also through play. You know, and I think that also in talking about mobile phones, I mean, you know, I saw some really interesting ways that teachers were connecting with families. And, you know, alongside of teacher education, we have to look at community education, you know, the opportunity to engage, you know, cultural institutions, various others to see as part of that, you know, and coming forth and helping us to emerge out of the pandemic with another, you know, I guess, what could be another pandemic coming again, a revisiting, which we do hope doesn't happen. But I mean, you know, we just don't know. But I'm seeing teachers feeling stressed already. So I think that it's really important that we start to think about what it is that we can do in teacher faculty, you know, where training is taking place. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Lorena?
So I think I think there's a couple of things that we try to emphasize, and I think we definitely still think the pandemic exists. It's not over. We work in a multidisciplinary team with epidemiologists, with many public health experts and public policy analysts and education specialists and people who work in economics. And I think that we need to kind of, one of the things that is really important is to dialogue across disciplines. In 2020, we created we spent so many useless debates discussing on the debate between the economy and health, and if we could sacrifice one versus the other. And this year in Brazil, I feel that we're spending a lot of time thinking about mandatory education in on-site versus health, and that it's the time to open the schools no matter what. And instead, we need to be thinking about incentives to work together to make schools better. We know that public schools in Latin America have numerous challenges before the pandemic. We know the inequalities exist, and we should be thinking about how, in that context, we can design programs that protect more vulnerable situations, and we work together, and to kind of move away from some of the false debates. I think that also the internet is here to stay, and it should be viewed the way water and electricity are viewed, as a fundamental right. People who didn't have access to the internet didn't have the same pandemic. And so we need to guarantee for the future, there's an incentive to have the internet as a means of communicating with society, and society gaining access to information. And it's an investment that benefits society and benefits our resilience to deal with such an emergency. So it doesn't have to solve the problem of education, but it's a right that students should have access to the internet, and there's gains to society to inclusion. And I think we need to kind of be thinking about some really bold interventions moving forward, because I think we spent too much trying to fix something that was broken in the pandemic, and we can't do that now to say, now the pandemic is over and we can go back to what was broken and use it the same way. No, the pandemic is still here. So why, if we're not taking these actions, why not take a bigger step and be more bold in some of these actions?
Thank you, Lorena. Fernando, Alejandra, some last comments from you. Alejandra?
Yes, I was about to say, I fully agree that we need to guarantee access to the internet. That was our biggest concern during online education in the pandemic. It was that the divide was like, inequality was rising, and it was rising in a very scary manner. We had the private school students who had Zoom activities and carefully constructed lesson plans that they could apply online, and that they were synchronous and asynchronous, and a combination of activities with their teachers, and even with partnerships with the schools in other countries, and like a whole new world opening up to them thanks to the pandemic. And on the other hand, we had kids who did not even get the daily contact with their teacher, who could be a reliable adult when they were living in a household full of abuse. And so that scared us. That scared us big time. One of the things that was done in Paraguay was that all phone companies, all internet companies, gave access to the portal of the Ministry of Education, the one that had all the online lessons and all the plans and the activities where you could follow along your grade level. You did not have to have money on your account for that. You didn't need to have saldo, as we call it. You didn't have credit for internet. So even if you had your smartphone and you didn't have credit to make calls or to use the internet, that one site was freely available. And that was a good thing. And that is something that could be continued, for example. Because I think we need to come up with strategies to incorporate the use that has already been the changes that have already happened. More people are prioritizing smartphones over other investments, smartphones over cable TV, smartphones over refrigerators in the countryside. And so we have to take advantage of that and teach, do digital literacy programs to make sure that they can truly open up the world, and not just connections to Facebook to post memes, but all the new abilities that they could gain from that, remote work that they could do from their phones, both for families, entrepreneurs, children in schools. And so recognize that this is not going away. This has changed, and going back to in person, the teacher, the blackboard, and copying on paper, we're not going back to that world.
Thank you. Roberto has left. I understand Silvia también has. We are closing now. Fernando, do you want to say some last words? And we close up?
I'm agree what with was Alejandra was saying in the same line.
Thank you. Thank you very much to everyone. It was a very good discussion. We will put you in contact. So probably if there is something good happens out of this seminar as a project that Roberto was talking, it's a very great achievements. So, and please contact each other and make connections. And thank you again. Thank you all organizing committee, FAPESP, and bye.
Ciao.